Howdy, I'm Jeffrey Snover. Glad to talk to you today. By the way, in the back corner here, don't go rushing now, but at the end, our documentation staff has a set of great cheat sheets. And so we got the desired state configuration cheat sheet. If you're not following desired state configuration, you're making a mistake. It's one of the most important technologies we've ever had. You got a bunch of PowerShell 4.0 example cheat sheets, the ISE, Integrated Scripting Environment cheat sheet, and the PowerShell language version 4 language cheat sheet. So they're all there, and there's also a link that you can download these, and they can tell you what that is too. So again, welcome to the show. I'm going to talk to you today about just enough administration. And this is a PowerShell toolkit to secure what I call post-Snowden world. So let's first talk about the problem, okay? So, in case you weren't up on current events, things are heating up in this area. After about a decade, a decade and plus ago, there was a security crisis, and Microsoft, rose to that challenge, really invested heavily, created the secure software development lifecycle, really improved our products, and really took us a while, but we got to the point where I think we're sort of some of the best in class at producing secure software. So we were feeling pretty darn good about that. Now, let's just be clear. We always try and be humble about that. We're always, we're never arrogant about that. We're always looking for the flaws, etc. But, confidentially, we were feeling pretty good about our investments. Now, then a few years ago, we started to see the bad guys really up their game, right? And the bad guys got very good very quickly. And then, so that's one. Number two was the introduction, or we became aware of the nation states with unlimited budgets. And the ability and sophistication of some of the things they were doing was really something we had never seen before. Now, for those of you who say, hey, I'm not that concerned about the NSA looking at my documents or looking at my data, here's the reality. The reality is that those guys really just expose the issues that were really there. And it's just a matter of time before the really bad guys are using the same techniques. So this is not just about, well, the government wants to see my data, but the bad guys are going to be using the same techniques in a matter of time. So the reality is there is a tsunami of bad heading our way. Okay? And so this is a way to try and help you deal with some of that. So let's recap. There's this guy, Michael Hayden, pretty smart guy. All right, 4-star general, director of the NSA, director of the CIA, director of national intelligence. Now let me ask you there. Anybody have any assets more important to protect than this guy? No, I don't think so. Actually, last week we had a meeting of technical fellows and distinguished engineers at Microsoft, and I was giving this very same talk, and I asked, hey, is any of you in the room smarter than this guy? To which some people said yes, so anyway. And one guy got up and said, I know that guy. And you were all smarter than him. Anyway. So I just dropped that line. But clearly none of us have things more important to protect than this guy. And then there's this guy, Edward Snowden, right? 30-year-old college dropout. Gentlemen, to your corners. Okay? Now, Michael Hayden went and did something that every single one of us has to do every single day. In fact, he did it in a way he never really thought about it, never thought about the ramifications, and really, he just can't get anything done without doing this, making this decision. And that is, went to this guy and he said, you're an admin on my systems. And that was probably the worst decision have I ever made, like ever. I bet you he's still kicking himself in the butt over that one. And the reason why, of course, is admins have the keys to the kingdoms, right? Admins are gods. We all know that, right? My goal is to transform admin gods into demigods, all right? We want to make them a little less gods, okay? Now, here's the thing. So much so. Now here, just like irony poisoning, okay? One of the documents that Snowden released was a document from the NSA saying, I hunt and hack system admins. That's right, the NSA is hunting you, right? You. Why? They know you're not doing anything wrong. Well, at least you guys I'm not so sure about. They know you're not doing anything wrong, but they said, who better to gain access to the systems than the people that have the keys to the kingdom? That's their phrase. Who better to target than the person that already has the keys to the kingdom? So that's why they're going after the admins. If I get the admin, I get the systems. Okay? Now that's a very important concept. It's a new concept, or at least it was new to me. Okay? So here's the thing, admins. Of course we need admins. But, people make mistakes. Admins make mistakes. We have all that power. Wonderful Mark Manasseh here is so good with an image. This morning was saying, yeah, when Superman steps on your toe, it's really bad, When super empowered people make mistakes, bad things happen. Next is that sometimes, like in the case of Snowden, they're bad actors, right? That they are intentionally doing stuff that, cause you harm. But more important, and most important, your admins are part of the attack surface. When I grew up, we have these threat modeling books, and a nice big thick book. Hey, think about your assets, think about your surface, your attack surface. Here are the various attacks. And then we go and we write code to try and protect those surfaces. But the reality is that your admin is part of the attack surface as well. That if I can gain access to you, I can gain access to all your systems. And in fact, that's what the NSA was doing. They were using social techniques, social engineering techniques, and some of the social sites to try and hack an admin so that they could then get access to the rest of the systems. And again, let me be really clear about this. This is not a bash the NSA session at all. But these very same techniques are going to be used by the bad guys not that far down the line. So that's why it's illustrated. So JitJea, this just enough administration, is all about reducing the risk of admins. Now let me be clear here. This is not eliminate the risk of admins. It's reduce the risk of admins. Okay? So a lot of this, sometimes you hear these talks and it's like, I got the problem solved. Here's what we do. And conceptually it might make a lot of sense, but then you look at it and it's not operational. Okay? So what you're going to see here is that this is something that can be actually operationalized. People can deploy it, but it doesn't solve the problem. It reduces and mitigates the risk of the problem. I'll be very precise about the sort of things it does. I will also point out that this is a small piece, a very, very important piece, but a small piece of a larger reinvestment. We are reinvigorated at Microsoft with security, and we have some very big investments in this space. So this is just one of them. Okay, so hey, wouldn't it be great if that people didn't have to have admin privileges to do their job? Okay, so often when I talk to teams, I say, well, hey, how many people have admin privileges? You should do this. You go talk to your staffer, you might know, and ask how many people actually have admin privs, and the numbers will shock you. And then you say, well, do they really need that? I mean, often we're giving admin privs to people who need to log into a server and install some patches and reboot the server, or to reboot SQL. And that's all they need to do, and we give them admin privileges and they can do anything. They can read all the files, they can look at all the data, they can copy the data on zip drives, and anyway. So would it be great if they didn't have the ability to do that? Wouldn't it be great if a machine got cracked, it didn't leak high-value credentials? So it turns out that as an admin, if you log into that machine, your credentials stay there in some form. Okay? So you go, like when the help desk says, could you please help me with my desktop? A help desk person comes in and they got admin privs. Those privs are now on that box, and if that box gets cracked, those credentials are available. They leak. And so that's a way that what happens, you drill into this, what happens is the bad guys get a toehold, and then they're able to use this credential harvesting business to then spider their way through the network. So wouldn't it be great that if they actually did crack a box, that box did not yield any high-value things that allowed them to spider out into your network? And wouldn't it be great if people only got to do the things that they needed to do to perform a particular task, And then that every single action, all the admin actions, were logged and auditable. So let's take our scenario. I hired this new guy, this new admin, seems like a bright young guy, and I'm going to have him manage my servers with my trusted gold, my treasure on it. So, young Eddie here tries to do an enter PS session to the server, and it says, no, sorry, that's not going to work. Talk to your supervisor. Confused, he talks to the hero of our story. He says, hey Jeffrey, I need to be admin on SQL 1 to restart, or admin on server 1 to restart SQL. I say, no, Eddie, you don't need to do that. Just use JitJea and connect to the maintenance endpoint. So now he's able to enter JitJea session, gives the name of the server, and gives the maintenance endpoint name. And he's able to restart SQL Server. Yay, happy days. And then he tries to steal secrets, and he's informed that he's not authorized to steal secrets. So that's where we're going. So again, the model here is to incrementally reduce our exposure to admins, or the admin exposure. We do this, number one, by reducing the number of people with admin privs. Okay, I'll be clear. There'll always be people with admin privs. Those people will always have a mechanism by which they can go do anything to the box. To be operational, you need those things. The goal is to say, how do I reduce the number of times that has to happen? Okay. So, number two is that when they come in, we want to reduce the scope of the admin privileges. That if these privileges if a machine gets cracked, we basically limit the damage that can happen by the scope. And then we want to reduce what can be done when someone has admin privileges. So this brings us to the Just Enough Admin Toolkit. So this is all based upon features that we had done for the Exchange team. In fact, we did these features, where's Lee? He's not here. He was at the other session. But I think we did these in PowerShell version 2, potentially PowerShell version 3. The Exchange team was looking at doing Exchange Online, and they said, hey, everything's manageable through PowerShell, and all the administrative functions are available through PowerShell. Now, we need to allow the entire world to be able to perform those functions in a safe way across the internet. It's like, oh, okay, how are we going to do that? Well, by the way, that was one of the things we got with IIS hosting. That's what drove our IIS hosting, was the ability for Exchange to be able to run PowerShell in IIS. But then what happens is we introduced a number of security features for them to support that. So I don't know if you ever thought about it, but if you use Office 365, you're able to go to Exchange and perform admin functions. I mean, they're really admin functions, but you obviously don't give admin privileges to the online Exchange services. It's using the very same techniques that we used here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take those techniques and we're going to refine them and make them available and applicable to everyone. Okay? So I've got a few simple concepts. Okay? And it turns out, by the way, the technology is actually pretty straightforward. It is the trick is in packaging that technology in a way that people can actually understand, adopt, and execute on. Okay? So originally when we started this, I had this nice high-grain, high fidelity security model, and I talked to the security guys and their heads exploded. They said, oh, that's wonderful. And then I'm actually deploying this in production servers at MSIT, with our internal IT organization, and we talked to them and they're like, huh? Like, how's that going to work? How am I going to be able to do that? What's going to happen on the weekend? Blah, blah, blah. And so what we found is as we actually go work with these guys, you need to simplify it. You need to make it very, very simple. And so what you're going to see is this nice sliding scale of sophistication where the basic model is very, very simple and provides a certain level of security. And then you're able to do a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more. And then when you get really ambitious and all of a sudden you can't get your job done, you can go back and find the right level for you at any particular time. Okay, so the concepts are this: a JitJea toolkit. Okay, so what's a toolkit? Think about it. You got a toolkit, a box. You open up a box and you put the things in the box necessary to do a job, right? So a plumber's toolkit looks very different than an electrician's toolkit, which looks very different than a carpenter's toolkit. you have a toolkit, and you put into that toolkit the jobs necessary to perform a particular task. Like, hey, what are the tools I need to do SQL maintenance? Well, those are very different than the tools you need to do to add and remove users from Exchange. So don't put the Exchange tools in the SQL toolkit, okay? So you want to have these various toolkits, well-defined set of PowerShell commandlets that support a set of activities. Next is a JitJea endpoint. A JitJea endpoint is a management connection point that's where authorized users, you still have to be authorized, can connect to, and then they get provisioned the toolkits necessary to perform a task. And then all the actions are then run as a JitJea endpoint account. So you have a JitJea endpoint, you have a JitJea endpoint account. What's a JitJea endpoint account? And that is a managed local account. So specifically, when you create a JitJea endpoint, I will create a local account with that name, and I will put it in a main administrative domain, or administrative group. And so that when you connect to that endpoint, it's a PowerShell configuration endpoint. When you connect to that endpoint, you have a run as this local account. So you run as a local administrator, perform the actions, and then every night I reset the password on that account. So initially I give it a 127 character bit. It's a 127 character password, and then I'll reset that every night. You can reset it every hour if you want. Except when I reset it, you gotta reset the credentials on WinRM, and WinRM right now, when you make that change, you gotta restart WinRM. It's a pain in the ass, we're gonna fix it, but that's what you have to do. Yeah, Mark?
Could a group managed service account not have done some of those?
I
realize you want a local account.
Yep, so the question was, hey, could a group managed service account do that? Originally, that's where the path we were going, but it comes down to this, and I think the answer is, we're going to end up having to be able to support this, group managed service accounts, or NT accounts, or domain accounts. The problem is, with those other things, it expands the damage that can occur if somebody cracks that box. So we want to go as far as we can with this until we're forced to take that next level. Great question. Okay. And then we're going to now deploy this all with desired state configuration. Again, to simplify the deployment. Originally, I was doing this with a set of templates, and scripts, push this, push that, and I couldn't even keep track of it all, right? It was very, very complex. And now with desired state configuration, it becomes very simple. I got a JitJea toolkit, I can have a set of those toolkits, I define an endpoint. You don't have to define the endpoint account. That's behind the scenes. It's good to know about it, but you don't have to do anything about it. And when you create this endpoint, you specify what things you want, and it automatically happens. So it's very, very simple. Again, the concept, and we'll drill into the details of what's going on underneath the covers, but the key concept here is make it operational. So, again, you might have seen one of these things. This is a blast container. Like when the bomb squads want to blow up something, they put it in this, blow it up, and it contains the blast. So back to Mark's point. These JitJea endpoint accounts basically put that server in a blast container. If you crack that machine and you harvest the accounts, if all you get are local accounts, that machine's in a blast container. As soon as you start doing things like domain accounts or group managed service accounts, you harvest those, then you can get from that box to the next box and the next box and spider your way out. So that's why, again, we think at some point there'll be scenarios where you have to do this. We'll need to support it, but we want to go as far as possible without it.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, JitJea endpoints have to be set up on every administrative, any administrative server that you want to set up to be managed, right?
Correct. So the question is, you got to set this up on every every server that you want to have managed, and that is correct. Later you'll see, I guess at TechEd. TechEd? Yeah. TechEd, Kenneth Hansen, TechEd, or is it here? Anyway, Kenneth Hansen's going to give a talk about a similar concept, but different, called safe harbors. And safe harbors is a way to use desired state configuration to create a set of machines which are safe and protected and know about each other, and then it uses a jump box to be able to manage things. So similar but different, and the two work together well.
So
So you say Exchange is using this currently?
Exchange is using the underlying security techniques, mechanisms.
Okay, so I VPN and remotely connect to my Exchange server. If I let that Exchange account that is logged in and doing some administration, if I leave it too long, it seems to time out. Is that a trigger based on this that's happening?
No, it isn't. So the question was, hey, if I log in, so two things. One is Exchange Online Services is using these techniques to run the online service. They haven't released that stuff for the on-premise product, so that's one thing. The point was, hey, if he connects in using Exchange credentials or to manage Exchange, after a period of time, it logs out. What you're seeing there is the normal WinRM logouts, which are completely configurable. Later, you'll see I talk about how we will be able to add some just-in-time elements to this. In fact, that's actually the point. The vision was, hey, here's the vision I went to the IT guys with. Sorry, I went to the security guys, and they all looked and they said, that's exactly what we need. And I went to the guys running the systems, and they said, oh my God, leave me alone. I gotta lead them to it. Is the model we'd like to get to is you don't have any admin privileges. I got a trouble ticketing system. You go and you pick up your next piece of work. It says, hey, you're supposed to do this. Associated with that trouble ticket says, oh, that means in order to be successful with this work item, you need access to these toolkits on these servers for this period of time. When you accept that trouble ticket, the system should configure itself for you to do that work. You come in, everything you do is logged with that work, with that trouble ticket, you do your work, and then when time is done, you lose all those privileges. Again, the security guys love it. The other people are like, how's that ever going to work? How many operationalize that? They get freaked out. Yeah.
It'd be pretty cool if that account didn't actually maybe have a password, but instead that account was when you try to initiate the connection to the endpoint, if it would then call your phone, something like Azure MFA.
Yeah, so there's a multi-factor auth too, and we'll get into that as well. Right now we don't have that in focus. So there's two different issues. One is, hey, you coming in, are you really who you are? And then the second is, well, when you come in, what privileges do you have? But you know what, let me see. I don't know how long this talk goes, and I want to make sure we don't run out of time. So if you don't mind, kind of write down your questions, and hopefully we'll have time with them at the end. We don't want to zoom. Yeah, so clearly, Michael Hayden would have loved it if this guy was in a blast container, right? Yeah, I think he wants to find him and put him in one now. Anyway, so this is desired state configuration. This is how it looks. And it's pretty gorgeous, actually. So here we set up a desired state configuration. I'm going to do the file server. And I'm first going to have a function called get file server. And so I've got a for each $ node in get file servers. That's just a function you write that returns the list of file servers you have. I then have a node, and I create this JitJea toolkit. And I'm going to say I'm going to put my storage tools in there. I give it the name, and then I give it command specs. Now the command specs is here. It just says, it says module, storage, and SMB. Later you'll see that this is basically a CSV file, right, as a text, CSV text. But at this point, I'm just saying, I want these two modules put in this toolkit, and that's it. And then I create an endpoint, and I give it a name, and then I give it a toolkit. And I say, well, I want the storage admin toolkit to have storage tools. I can put all the toolkits in there if I want, but this is the simple version. You can provide a civil, and notice the wonderful desired state configuration depends on it. That says is, hey, before you execute the endpoint, before you make sure that that's true, make sure that the tool admin, the toolbox is there first. Okay? And then we run file servers. That then creates the MOF files for each one of these nodes. And then what we'll do is we'll say start DSC configuration. I give the deployment, and then give the computers to go make it so. So using this technique, I'm then able to provision that storage toolkit on a storage admin endpoint on all my file servers. Turns out I missed something like file system quotas or whatever. That's a different module. I just go in here, add it to the modules, run it again, it's updated. Okay? So very, very simple, easy to deploy. but you can get as fine-grained as you want. So I mentioned that that was a CSV file. So here's a SQL maintenance endpoint. And my command spec, notice it has module, name, it should be commandlet name, parameter, validate set, and validate pattern. Okay? So the first line says here, hey, I want the SQL module, and I want to expose all the getters. That's it. No deletes, no removes, no restarts, no sets. You only expose the getters. The next line says, notice there's a leading comma that says, I don't have to specify the module if I don't want to. I'm going to say that they can do get process. That's a pretty useful thing, pretty harmless. I'm going to allow get service. That's pretty useful as well. I'm also going to allow stop process. But here I'm going to say stop process only has the parameter name. And so, right, you can stop processes by ID or name. So if you just say stop process, they get the full stop process command. They can do everything. By specifying name, I say, oh, don't give it everything. Only give it the things that I say it has. And so here it has name, and here I have a validate set. Notice I use a semicolon because I need a set of these things, so that's the delimiter. And now it says the stop process can only delete things by name, and the name can only accept one of these two values, Calc or Notepad. Restart service, I'm going to again say, hey, you can restart service, you can really screw up the system. So I'm going to restart services, but only by name, and instead of saying which names, I'll give you a regular expression, and the value has to match that. So that says, I'll only stop services whose name begin with SQL. Okay? So you can see, you can get pretty darn sophisticated with this. And here's how I ultimately see this working, right? What you're going to do is you're going to use the Excel as your admin authoring tool. You're just going to set up a CSV file like this, and then when you see, again, one of the glories, and the thing I just love about desired state configuration, one of the many things I love about desired state configuration is I think we got a really great balance between imperative and declarative programming, right? So declarative programming, oh, there's this JitJea toolkits I want it to be maintenance, here's the name, etc., the command specs, and then imperative. At this point, go run this code. And the run the code says, hey, I want to cap this feed. Actually, I did that wrong. It should have been imports. No, it was cat. Cat's correct. Sorry, cat the CSV file. So you just use, you don't have to edit the CSV in PowerShell ISC. You can edit it in Excel. It's much better. Okay, so why do we do this stuff with JitJea on PowerShell? And the answer is really quite simple. Really, JitJea, just enough admin, is about controlling the actions that a user takes. Okay? We've had many years and attempts at trying to manage the rights that a user has through tokens, etc. And I think we've gone, pretty far down that path, and it often gets pretty darn complicated. Butler-Lamson claims that no one in the world understands Windows security. To which, when we saw we were both debriefed about some hackers having hacked into one of our customers' systems, and they walked through all the mechanisms that they use to do this, and get one box and then spider to the others and do all this, and it was truly terrifying. And so I said, well, Butler, this proves you're wrong. He said, what do you mean? I said, clearly someone does understand Windows security. to which his retort was, no, they don't understand it. They just figured out how to crack it. There's a difference. Okay, anyway, so here it's about controlling the actions that they do and trying to have a very simple model. And PowerShell is, of course, all about actions. Now, here's where we are able to do some things that other people can't. And that is because PowerShell, like any other shell, dispatches commands, right? Whether it's bash, etc. And because of that, we get to control what commands can be launched, right? And everybody can do that through things like path and things like that. But PowerShell has a new thing, and that is a unique thing, and that's called command visibility. Okay? So I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you do get command and you actually pipe it to format list star, there's quite a bit of information there. And one of those pieces of information is visibility. I don't know if you ever looked at that. But you can set, it'll be set to public, but you can change it to private. Now what does that do? Visibility determines there's a difference between what can be run versus invoked. Run versus invoked. What's that? Well, things can be run, executed, that can't necessarily be invoked. Invoked means the user says, please run this. And so there's a distinction between those. And you'll see that in a second. Just put a bookmark there. But unlike the other shells, PowerShell does our own command parsing. And that, my friends, is the key. Okay? This parsing is driven off data structures, right? So in Unix, when you say ping blah, 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 it resolves, oh, ping is this path, and it takes the blah, 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 and hands it to ping and says, best of luck, my friend. We don't do that. What we do is we say, hey, ping, or whoever you are, you tell me what your command structure is. I use that to then drive my parser. And the user type stuff, that's why we're able to do IntelliSense, because I know all the structure, and why we have complete command consistency, syntactic consistency. And then I take that, and then I drive the command itself. That's the fundamental difference. So the the parsing is all driven off data structures that the command gives us. But here's the key. Those data structures can be programmed. And those programs, those data structures can be programmed and then used to create proxies. So what's a proxy? A proxy is you take the command data structure, you modify it, and you say create a proxy. And what it does is it's a new command with the reprogrammed metadata, and it calls the underlying thing. Okay? So this is where it becomes key. Command visibility in these proxies is what makes this possible. Because what we do is we'll go get a command like get process or stop process, we'll modify it, we'll create the proxy, and then we set the underlying visibility to be private. So private says it can be run, but not invoked. Okay? So this is a command, its visibility is public, so the user can invoke it, but when it goes to do the work, it doesn't know anything about the logic, so it calls the underlying command, which needs to be able to be run. The user can't invoke it. The user can only invoke this, but this uses that to run it. That's the heart of it. That's the essence. That's all the power. And later I'll walk you through the code as to how, later, as in right now, I'll walk you through the code of how that will work. So here's how you do it. You say $command equals get command, stop process, and then there's this command metadata. You pass that data structure to it, and you get the metadata about the object. That metadata is the programmable object itself. And you're able to do wonderful things, like metadata has a list of parameters. And you can go futz with those parameters. Like here, stop process. Remember, I mentioned I don't want to be able to stop things by ID. So I eliminate that parameter. I just take it away. Like you're metaphysically not able to specify ID. Next is I take the name attributes. Have you ever noticed in PowerShell you write a function and there are these validation constraints? We say, hey, on your parameter, put this validation constraint, and it's things like has to be one of these values or has to be greater than 15, etc. And a lot of people have looked at those things and it's like, hey, Grant, that saves me one line of code. I'll just write that one line of code. And our answer has always been, no, don't. Use the validation constraint instead. And the answer is twofold. One is, it's not one line of code, it's two. Right? You got to do the test, and then if the test fails, you got to write an error message. And if you write the code, you're going to write an error message. That's different than the one you write, which is different than the one we write. You're all going to write unique error message. So poor Mark Manasseh here is going to run something, and he's going to see 1,000 different error messages. And Mark needs a pretty simple world. So we don't do that. We say, use my validation constraint, and I will do the test. And when an error happens, I give a uniform error message in all circumstances. I translate it to all languages, and we make the world simple for Mark. Okay? So the benefit is we now have all this rich validation stuff, and all those validation tools I can dynamically and programmatically add. So here I take one of those validation constraints. By the way, they would be very difficult to do with code because of side effects and blah, blah, blah. One of these validation constraints is very simple. So I just take the name attribute and I add the validate set attribute, and I say here are the only two values that you can specify. Notepad and Calc. And I set the default parameter set name. And then here's how you publish the proxy, right? I don't know if you know that, but function $squiggle brackets, you can put path names, Anyway, and then function is a path, is a drive. So here we're setting stop process, and we create a proxy. And then lastly, we hide the underlying visibility. So this is it. I mean, this is the heart of it. Pretty simple technology. And as I say, the real task is taking that core, putting an authoring experience around it, putting a deployment experience around it, and making it simple for people to do. That's the heart of it. So where we're going with this, next steps are things like work hours. Like, hey, does it make sense? Like, hey, here's your work. Do you really want people performing admin functions when they're not supposed to be working? Like, that's probably a red flag, right? So you might want to say, hey, these people work 9 to 5, or let's say they get in early and work late, 8 to 6 on work days. And so they shouldn't necessarily be able to perform admin functions outside of those work hours. So who can access which endpoints when? Then work tasks. This was the thing I mentioned about the trouble ticketing system. The ability to say, think of it as like one-shot work hours. You say, for a particular task, like this trouble ticket, who can access which endpoints when, and for how long? Okay. To admin off for ad hoc administration. I mentioned to you that there will always be a need for the ability for someone to come in and say, yeah, that was all great, but you got it wrong, and it's an urgent situation, and I just need to be able to do anything. Okay, that's great. But in order to do that, he's got to watch you, right? So it requires 2 sets of credentials to go do the ad hoc stuff. By the way, that is how the NSA is addressing the Snowden bufferama through 2 mechanisms. Mechanism 1 is this, just a policy, right? Gun to your head. You do no work unless that guy's with you watching you. So one guy does the work, one guy watches the other guy, shoots him if he does the wrong thing. Number 2 is they are investing heavily in automation. So to reduce the number of things that have to be done with an interactive admin. Okay? And then I mentioned to you Kenneth Hansen's talk around these safe harbors. Again, the model there is that if people are really they're really concerned about security, what they'll do is they'll set up a whole new air-gapped clean room, data center with fresh servers, and they start from scratch with media, and they just say, okay, I'm not connected to anything. I start with this, it's known good, known good, known good, known good, and then it's completely separate from everything else. The guys who are really secure about security, are really uptight about security. What we think is, we can give you most of the benefits of that at dramatically lower costs using virtualization and desired state configuration. The idea is you will model those sets of machines, right? In that air gap, it has its own AD. They set up a management station, and the only management that they'll allow of those machines has to come from that management station where everything is logged, right? So even you can't even get on one of the other machines and say, oh, well, I'm within the air gap, I'll manage things. No, they've locked down the firewall rules. Only managing commands can come from this machine and its backup, right? The jump boxes. So we think we can do the same sort of thing with virtualization and desired state configuration. Set up a group of machines with firewall rules that are locked down very tight so that specific conversations, oh, I'm a SQL server. I'm not a SQL server. I'm not going to open up the SQL port. I'm a SQL server, and I know that machine, and that machine are talking to me. So I will open up the SQL port to that machine, that machine, that machine. Not to everybody, right? So really lock it down, set up these jump points. Anyway, so that's where we're going with that. Safe harbors and jump boxes. And ultimately, again, this stuff is predicated on dropping your ad hoc GUIs, which uses dog's breakfast protocols, and using PowerShell. So it's PowerShell or GUIs layered over remote PowerShell. So here's ultimately where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to a situation where my new bright shiny admin here is going to manage my server and my pot of gold, and he's going to come say, try and manage it, he gets access denied. He comes to our hero and says, hey Jeffrey, I need to be an admin on this system. And I said, well, let's talk. What do you need to do? So I need to restart SQL. I said, okay, So what I do now is I approve a JitJea user, Snowden, for that machine, for that toolkit, for 20 minutes. Okay? Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes to restart SQL or something stodgy. Okay? So now, Eddie, you're good to go. Eddie then connects to that maintenance endpoint. He's able to restart SQL Server. Happy days. He's now trying to steal secrets, which he's unable to do. Nice error message. Wouldn't that be a great error message? Sorry, Edward, you cannot steal secrets. Anyway, so he's not able to do that because it's a constrained environment. And here's the trick. We're going to author these environments. You got to author it right. If you author it wrong, you got a risk. So one, you got to be careful about authoring things and not exposing things that people have a way to use to crack. But two is, hey, when they're done, get them the heck off the system. Okay? So after 20 minutes, he's going to forcibly log them out. Okay? And voila, happy days. Now, everything's been logged. So afterwards, I'm going to go collect the logs, find out what Snowden's been doing on my system, and then I'll use the wonderful PowerShell send mail message to alert security in that situation. So that's ultimately where we're going with this JitJea stuff. So now let's talk about under the covers. How do we really do this stuff? Okay. So you all know we have these things called PowerShell configuration endpoints. When you just do new session to a machine, you connect to a default name. It's Microsoft.PowerShell. You connect to that. It checks your access control list, and if so, you're able to then do anything you want. But these configuration endpoints, you can have quite a few of them. In fact, there's a server manager endpoint. If you say, get command PS session configuration, if you actually show get PS session configuration, you'll see there's quite a few of them, and you can create new ones. Now these things have names, they have access control lists, and they have startup scripts and run as credentials. So those are the two key things. Three things. ACL, here are the people that get access. When they gain access, I run as someone else, and I have a startup script. Now, I've tried to do this with configuration files, and I got pretty far, but I just kept running into problems. So I found that the configuration files were not effective for what I wanted to do here. They're good for some things, but the level of sophistication I was trying to deliver, I had to do all by myself with startup scripts. Here's how you do this. You just get the credentials with get credential. You register the PS session configuration. I don't know if you've ever done this, but you can either provide a CIDL itself, or you can say show descriptor UI, and you can use an interactive editor to then set the ACL on that endpoint. Having set it once, you can then get that CIDL and then set it for the rest of them. So that's a good technique. And then you specify a startup script, and this is literally the startup script that we do. No, that's not true. It's almost the correct file name. And then when you enter PS session, we'll do anything, new session or enter PS session, you can specify not just the name, but you can configure it. You can specify the configuration endpoint. At this point, somebody that you now can do admin tasks without having admin cribs. This is the heart of it. And then what you do is you constrain your environment in the startup script. So at this point, they're going to come in, and they can do anything. So wait a second, you just went and gave a non-admin the rights to be an admin, and they can do anything. Not such a good idea. So that startup script is pretty important. That startup script is going to define what you can do. Okay? And by the way, what I'm doing here, I want to just explain. For most people, they're going to use the JitJea toolkit and have a nice simple world, happy experience. What I'm doing now is I'm teaching you mapping that JitJea toolkit to the underlying mechanisms, just for one, your edification, in case you want to use the same mechanisms to do something else, or if you say, hey, that JitJea toolkit, I think I can do a better job, you can extend it. Okay. So, these startup scripts, they can do anything. Most important thing is to set the language mode. Okay? Now, language mode, here's the thing you need to know about the language mode. No language is the secure language. Okay? When you have no language mode, the most important thing, it does a lot of things, the most important thing is it no longer allows you to define functions. All the other language modes allow you to define functions. Now, why is that important? Go back to that conversation. Visibility affects what can be invoked versus run. Okay? Because it's private, it can be run but not invoked. So imagine stop process. Stop process, the underlying thing, I keep private, and I publish this limited stop process that sorry, I made that one private, I made this public, and it limits what you can do. If I've given you access to the language, you can just say function ha 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 stop process LSASS minus force. You've defined that thing. Now, you're going to invoke ha ha ha, but it will run stop process. It's going to call the underlying thing, and all your protection goes away. So the critical thing here is if you're creating secure endpoints is you have to have no language. Now it turns out that it does a whole lot of other things. It's a very secure environment. In fact, all what happens in no language mode is you actually don't patch PowerShell to it. It looks like it does. Underneath the covers, what we see is, oh, I'm talking to a no language mode. What happens is the parser on the local system parses what you've typed, produces a data structure, and that data structure goes across. Okay, so imagine the case you say stop process minus blah, 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 that string. If you send it to a regular endpoint, that string goes across, the remote parser parses it and executes it. If it's a remote endpoint that has no language, we take that, we see that it's no language, so I can't send that string. There's no parser on the other side. So locally, I parse it, produce a data structure, and send it across. So one, we are super happy with the security of the PowerShell parser. You know, knock on wood, has not had any problems whatsoever. But back to being that humble, you know, trying to hope it will never have any problems as well. But in a belts and suspenders mode, we're using no language. The parser's not even involved. You know, it limits the possible damage. Anyway, so there's the different language modes, and it also can control what gets loaded and seen. Okay, so scripts is the execution context is the variable, session state is the property, and underneath there determines what things can be seen. Scripts are external scripts. Clear this out so that people can't run external scripts. Here, applications. These are things like your native code exes, ping, IP config, etc. By default, its value is star, which says execute anything. Here, we clear that out, so you can't execute anything. You can only specify the things, you can then specify only those things that people can run, and you have to give the full qualified command. So if someone says, oh, I'd like to do ping, what you do is you say get command on ping, you get its definition, which is its full path name, and you put it in this, and then they'll be able to run ping, or cat. And you can also then mention the mechanism to make things private. And you can set up logging. I missed something there. Screwed up. Let's show you. Sorry. So then there are certain commands which are very impactful, so you want to always hide them. Most important is invoke expression. As a general rule, if you're doing invoke expression, you're either super, super smart or the opposite. Invoke expression is extremely powerful and dangerous. Okay, so if you're ever doing invoke expression, you really want to look at that and say, is there another way to do that? Okay, because invoke expressions basically takes a string and says run it. And often you're doing that because you've grabbed some code from someone else, or you've taken input from them and composed a string and you run it, and that is the path to hell. Okay, that's why. No, it is. That's why I mentioned the PowerShell parser is just rock solid. We knew about these flaws, these SQL injection attacks, and designed our parser so that they wouldn't have them. But if you use invoke expression, you sidestep all that and you introduce that risk. Okay, so you definitely want to hide that. Some of the other ones you want to hide that are high impact. You can set up logging. So logging says on every module there's a parameter called log pipeline execution details. You set it to be true, then every time you invoke that command, we take all the details of the command you're running and we put it in the ETW logs under the PowerShell. And then you can do anything you want in a startup script. I mean, it's truly marvelous, right? So here's an example where you say, hey, I'm going to send mail message saying who came in on what machine. Now, why might that be interesting? Well, remember the case I said you'll always have a mode where you have to allow a set of people to access anything, right? The ad hoc administration. In general, the way you want to do that is to say, you don't want to do that. By the way, when you do that, I'm going to watch everything that you do, and we're going to have a conversation about it. Okay, so only do that if you want to have a conversation. If you don't want to do that, use the normal mechanisms. So here, as part of the startup script for that ad hoc environment, you can send mail saying, hey, Alexander's logging in again. And when I get a bunch of these, I'm going to say, Alexander, what seems to be the issue? What's wrong? Are there tools we're missing? Or are you just not getting the memo? Because I don't want you doing that. Okay, so you can do anything you want here. Additionally, you can do things like, hey, check the daytime and say, hey, if now, day of week, is equal to Saturday or Sunday, go home. You're not supposed to be working, right? So that will then terminate that session. They won't be able to do anything. You can then also limit when tasks can be done. Here's some logic that said, imagine you write yourself a get no admin user, which takes the user, and I don't know if you know this, PS sender configure, PS sender info tells you who you came in as. And if you wrote a function that says, hey, give me who came in, and I'll tell you whether they're authorized, and if they're authorized, when they're authorized from and to. And so this is some code that says, hey, if you come in and you're trying to log in outside of when you're able to, I'm just going to say, no, you can't do that. Now, here's an important distinction. Imagine I say, okay, you can log in between 8 and 5. Okay? Now, you come in and it's 4:45. You log in, I run this, and it says, happy days, let you in. But you logged in at 4:45. It's going to continue to let you perform operations until your token time's out. That's a couple of weeks. Or you're inactive, and that's many, many hours. So you can perform admin functions long after that time frame. So that's why you want to do this. So this, you can do anything in a time-up script. So here what I'm doing is I'm taking the session in. Hey, when does this end? I calculate, I create a timer. I say that the timer interval is when it's supposed to end versus subtracted from now times the milliseconds. I then register an event that says, hey, when that timer goes off, I say, hey, your session's ended, and I call set should exit. Set should exit. Now the difference here is I could have exited the process right away, but imagine you were performed in the middle of a long-running operation. If I exit it, I'm going to terminate that process. And in general, if something's going, you don't want to terminate it in the middle. You want to let it run to completion and then terminate. And that's what set should exit will do. Set should exit says, let the work that's going on finish, and then when it's finished, terminate the session. And so then we start that timer, and that will run in the background, and things are ready to go. Here's how you log all administrative actions. I'm out of time, so I'm going to zoom through this a bit. And I mentioned to you that we want to be able to run these GUIs, run PowerShell. It all requires PowerShell. And so a bunch of you are going to be very comfortable with it. Some of your coworkers are not going to be as comfortable with this. So we're going to have to go really get good about these PowerShell over GUI. Show command, great stuff, only work against your local run space. So we're going to have to modify that so it can work against remote run spaces. Tools like Power GUI, Show UI, etc. I think they're going to become even more important with this model. So I mentioned to you this guy Michael Hayden at Black Hat 2010. He was asked. He gave a keynote. And he was asked, "Hey, what do we do about all these hacks? We're getting hacked. We're getting hacked." He says, "Man up, defend yourself." So that's what this is all about. Gee, is this just enough admin toolkit to put guys like this in a blast container? Okay, so I've got a few minutes, so let's show you what this looks like. Let's see if I can work this out. Let's do this. looks great on my screen, so you get us. It will work. It will work. Come on. Yes, excellent. Okay, so here is what this looks like. So, so here, look, I got an MOTD, message of the day. I got this configuration I call make clean. I don't know if you know, but desired state configuration. But are we done? What time are we supposed to end?
Next session starts at 10.
It starts at 10.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Enter the session. Must must config demo 3. There, I got my message of the day. Sorry, I thought we were. And the thing I want to show. Come on. Okay, so change directory C/temp dir. Oh, happy days. I take copy test.csv to test2.3.csv. Happy days works just great. Now let's take a look at the contents of that. Test3.csv. Says no. So I configured this so that you can navigate, you can do file management, but you can't look at the contents of the file. The ability to do management doesn't necessarily mean that you should be able to look at the contents of it. So these are the sort of things you can do with just enough admin. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry for my